Time seems to be important to us, but it's not the same everywhere. As David will tell you about Guyana, time really doesn't mean much there. They have all kinds of time. When I was there and we set up a study, you could set up a study any time of the day that you wanted. And when you have an evening meeting, it's sort of, we're going to start around this time and people will be coming and going. Time is just not the same there. But here, very important. And we mark time constantly. And one of the things that we do, marking time, of course, is the calendar. And here we are at the end of one year and the beginning of another. Marking time keeps us on track where we want to be and what we want to do, and we can count on things happening or not happening because of the time that we mark. But as we come to the end of a year, marking time gives us an opportunity to think about what has been and what will be. And obviously, thinking and concluding, having self-examination and moving forward is extremely important. And coming to the end of a year and beginning a new one is like a closed door followed by an open one. Think with me about that for just a few minutes. The idea of a closed door and an open door happens right there in that text that was just read. And in the life of Paul, in his missionary journey, we see some things that happened in connection to that shows how a closed door can happen, but an open door will follow. Before he headed out on that second missionary journey, he had been with Barnabas on the first one. But because of a contention over John Mark going with them on the second one, because in the first journey, John Mark left them and went home. Barnabas wanted to stay with John Mark, and Paul said, no, we're not taking him. And the closed door of a partnership happened. But then another door opened. And now Silas came on board, and now we see Paul and Silas working together from a closed partnership to an opened one. As they started that journey, in the text that was read, Paul intended to go here, and he thought he ought to do this, and the Spirit said, no, you're not going there. You're not going to Bithynia. You're not going into Asia. God closed the door of a place to preach. But then he opened another one. And through the dream, they concluded God had called them to go into Macedonia. One door closed, and another one opened. And as they began to preach, the people didn't like it at all, because they were preaching things that conflicted with what they believed. And therefore now they get thrown into prison. Paul and Silas, Acts 16, and the prison door closed. But then another door opened, because the jailer was receptive to the gospel. And Paul and Silas were able to preach to him and teach him the truth about Jesus, and he became a Christian. The prison door closed, but the heart to the jailer was opened. When they were let out of prison and they began preaching again in Acts 17, twice they went to cities where some Jews followed after them, some Jews who were highly upset at how Paul was preaching. They were upset because he was saying the Jewish system is no more, and they wanted it to be that we would hold on to some things from the Jewish law that had been solved in Acts 15, but these Jews just couldn't stand it. And they drove him out of 2 cities. These angry Jews closed the door to some people. But that door closed, and another one opened. Open to the Gentiles in Acts 17, where Paul preached one of the great sermons on Mars Hill about the existence of God. In Paul's life, we can see right there that there are doors that close, but there are doors that open. I rather imagine that if we think back over our lives, every one of us would say, well, that was a door that closed. I can now see it. But then, thankfully, others opened. You might think, for instance, of times that you tried to get a job and the door was closed to you and you couldn't get that job. But then, something came along, opened. And now, it's better than it would have been. Maybe the doors of some relationships were closed to you, but then other relationships came that were opened to you. And we could recount those over and over. As we come now to the door that is closing on 2018. Looking to the door that will open by God's will to 2019. How should we view these closed and open doors? Let me give you a few thoughts to help us as we close one and open another. Consider first the closed doors. Let us remember, number one, that some doors need to be closed. Some doors don't need to stay open. In Philippians chapter 3, verses 4 through 8, Paul is writing about some closed doors. He said, if anyone has the right to boast, I have it more. And he goes on to say what he had been. He said, I was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. According to the law, a Pharisee. Zeal, I persecuted the church. Righteousness, which is by the law, blameless. But notice what he said earlier. I did these things. What was I? I did these things, setting them aside. This is what I had, but I closed that door. He had something that he closed off. You see, the truth of the matter is, there are doors that need to be closed. We close some doors so that we are not stuck in the past. Whatever happened in 2018 happened. But we dare not live in 2018 in 2019. We close the door because it needs to be. We close the door so that we are not stuck in the present. Right now, the door is about to close. I don't want to stop here. I want to do something more. Paul writing said, I was where I was, and I was dealing with the things that I was dealing with. This is the kind of person I was. This is the life that I had. But he wasn't stuck there. He didn't stay where he was. He understood that some doors absolutely need to be closed. But number two, closed doors help you to focus on an open door. If we don't close one, we may not look for another one. We may continue to be caught in that door. So if we close the doors we need to, we then can focus on the doors that we need to look for. Closing a door helps us refocus. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, ask and you'll receive. Seek and you'll find. Knock and it will be opened. You know what? We're never going to find a door if we're not looking for it. We won't find a door unless we are looking for it. One of the things that Jesus meant when he said, ask and you'll receive, seek and you will find, was look for the door. But if I don't close some, I'm not going to be able to look for another one, because I'll be satisfied with this one. Number two, focusing not only helps me to concentrate forward, but a closed door helps me get over the things that I have closed off, the things that I shut away. Paul wrote about himself in 1 Timothy 1. He said, I was a blasphemer, a persecutor, and an insolent man. But he said, I did all of this in ignorance. God's grace was upon me. And he said he put me in the ministry even though these things had been the case. Notice what he said in verse 16. These things happened to me as a pattern for those who would believe on Jesus Christ. You see, we close the door that we need to close. And once we've closed it, we can get over those things. I realized I needed to close them. And Paul said he knew it. This is the kind of man he was. But he shut the door. And in closing the door, he now could be an example to others who needed to do the same thing. Are there some doors that we need to close so that we can focus on other open doors? Third, about closed doors, they are very instructive for the future. These closed doors tell us something. They are instructive. They tell us you need to move on. You need to get past all of this. You need to put some things behind. You know what? We don't want to be defined by our failures. There is still success ahead. Again, in Philippians 3, Paul said, the things that were gain to me, I counted loss for the excellence of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord. Paul said, here's the deal. The deal is, I needed to move on from these things, and I learned from them. The things that I did that were wrong, I learned from them, and they made me a better person. They made me who I am. I'm not the same that I was because he closed the door. And if I'm not willing to close the door and learn from the door that I have closed, I'm going to be stuck exactly where I am. It is important to learn to be instructed by the closed doors. There are things that we can learn from the closed doors for our purposes. What kind of closed doors do we need? Did you fail this year? Did you mess up at all? Do you find yourself beating yourself up because of something or some things that happen in your life? I would imagine that we've all experienced that. We need to close the door. It represents the idea that we will not be held down by the problems of the past. We will not be held down by the things in which we failed. But there's also a way in which we should understand that we should set and close the door on successes as well. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul was writing there and he said, "Lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of revelations that God was giving me, He gave me a messenger from Satan, a thorn in the flesh, lest I should boast." He said, I prayed for God to take it away, and God said, "My grace is sufficient for you." His prayer was not answered the way he wanted it. God said, "No, I'm not doing that, but I'll do this." Even though we've had successes this year, to keep from being spoiled, we close the door on those to look for more that will come in the future. Closed doors are important. And for any one of us, look in our lives, find the doors that need to close, and close them. So that, number two, we can look for the open doors. When Paul was forbidden to go and preach, the Holy Spirit said, "No, you're not going there. You're not going to do that." And he said, "Okay, what?" God gave him a vision. "Oh, you opened another door." God always opens doors. God is in the business of closing, and God is in the business of opening doors. Open doors say, number one, there's always hope. In Romans 5, verses 1 to 5, Paul writes about hope. And he says concerning the tribulations that come in life, he says, these afflictions produce perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope that cannot be destroyed. Hope will not disappoint you. An open door says everything is still good. Everything is looking forward. I still have hope. No matter what has happened in the past, there is hope for the future. In 1 Corinthians 15, in writing about the time of the resurrection, Paul inserted this one little statement when he said in verse 19, "If in this life only we have hope, we are of all men the most to be pitied." If there's not hope, we are pitiful people. The open door says, there is hope. The open door says, you don't have to be stuck where you are. The open door says, this next year can be better than the one previous. I can move on from my failures. I can build on my successes. God closes one door and He opens another, because that's what God does. God says, you don't have to be stuck where you are. There is hope. The definition of hope is simple. Desire plus expectation is indeed hope. You desire things to be better this next year in some ways. Do you expect them to be better? If we are working toward that goal, if we are making plans and goals, then absolutely things can and will be better, because the open door says there is hope. The open door says, here's your chance to grow. Here's your chance to grow. Here's your chance to get better. There's an interesting little statement in Revelation chapter 3. To the church in Philadelphia, the only one that God did not level a rebuke at those 7 churches. That's the only one. But then he says to the church in Philadelphia something interesting. He says, I have set before you an open door that no one can close, and you have a little strength. He didn't rebuke them. In fact, he went on to praise them for all of the things that they had done standing up for him. But he said, you have a little strength. In other words, you can grow. I put an open door in front of you, church in Philadelphia, so you can get greater strength. We can grow by learning new things about ourselves. Things we had no idea. God's open doors often are meant for that very purpose. To say to us, look what I see in you. You didn't see it, but I see it. In some ways, are there things about your life right now that you had no idea could happen? Or that you had no idea you had the ability to do? God's open doors often say, let me tell you something new about yourself. But God's open doors also say, let me improve something you already know about yourself. God will open a door to do those kinds of things. Maybe you say, I just not comfortable with that, but you have a talent. God can take that talent and grow it into that. Because God's open doors say, I'll help you grow. You can learn about yourself. You can improve yourself. That's what an open door signals. And when God opens one, I need to see it as a chance to grow, to move forward, to be better. Finally, an open door says, God is still in control. Just when things may seem at the worst, if we're looking, God will open a door. Think to a time when you were at your wit's end. I mean, you didn't know where to turn. You didn't have a resource. You didn't know how things were going to be. And as far as you were concerned, this is it. I don't have anywhere to go. But then, God's open door appears. Maybe in the person of Christian people who reach out to help. Maybe in the form of an opportunity that you didn't know about and now you have it. God is in control. In 1 Corinthians 16, Paul closes talking to the Corinthians saying, I'm going to come see you, but not right now, because there is an effective door that's been opened to me. And in 2 Corinthians 2, he's reminding them about that. And in verse 12, he says, this door was opened to me by the Lord. Paul didn't know the details. He just knew that God was in charge. When we let God open the doors and we walk through them, and God's in charge, things just work. Maybe the lesson to close the door on one year and open it on the next one is to say, I'm closing the door on me trying to control things more, and I'm going to open the door and let God be in charge. If every one of us will figure out a way to let God take more control of our lives, that open door will change our lives. It may be planning more individual personal prayer time. Let God be in control. It may be more individual personal Bible study time so that God is in control. It may be more faithful involvement in the assembly of the saints so that God is in control. Maybe it is more involvement in ministry, working for the Lord through the avenues that we create as a congregation. And in that way, God is in control. The whole point is simple. Let's close the doors we need to. And let's look for the doors that God has and will open as we close one year and head into the next. The process of coming to the Lord is a closed and open door too. It's closing the door on sin and opening the door on salvation. Repenting that we have ever fallen into the traps of Satan and recognizing God's open door when He said, "Come, all you who labor and are heavy laden, I'll give you rest." Today, if you're not a child of God, as we close this year, wouldn't it be great to close the door on being separated from God and open the door through immersion into Jesus Christ to a relationship with God? Wouldn't that be a great way to end one year and start another? If there's something anyone here needs to close and open these 2 years, our shepherds will be at the front. You can meet them if you need while we stand and sing together.